Welcome to this week's episode of The Retirement Spy. My name is Duncan, and I'll be walking you through this session. Our mission is to help those entering phase 2 of life and ready to embrace this chapter with gusto and an attitude of carpe diem to live your full life. You can find out more about us at www.theretirementspy.com or send us ideas, topics to info@theretirementspy.com. Today, we're fortunate enough to have my friend Steve Soteres, who has embraced the clay shooting pastime in retirement and has become quite an accomplished shot. Steve, welcome to the the Retirement Spy. Tell us a little bit about your phase 1 career before your retirement. What did you do?
Duncan, thanks for having me on. This is, I'm flattered. I've never considered myself interview worthy, so this will be fun. So I grew up in Atlanta and graduated high school in '88. I went to Auburn University, where I met my wife, who's now the mother of my 2 children. My oldest son just graduated from Auburn, and my youngest is at University of Georgia. So I went to Auburn and was in the building science program there. But I also joined a fraternity, Sigma Chi. And so when graduation came around, which funny enough, I didn't really know how many credits I had needed to graduate. And Michelle said, well, you have 10 credits left. You better get into gear because you got to get out of here eventually. Fraternity brother of mine had gone to work for a company that was a small startup. He actually started, I think, the year that they started, but with Choate Construction Company. So at the end of my college career, you have to do a thesis project, which is based on an actual construction project. I called this fraternity brother and said, hey, I'm getting ready to graduate. I need a project. Can you send me some drawings? And so he did. And long story short, at the end of that, he said, why don't you give me a call when you graduate because we're hired. So I started at Choate Construction Company back in, I think it was 92. Somebody can fact check the math between 88 and 92. Started as a junior estimator and pretty quickly worked my way up into the leadership. And I will say that Millard Choate, who you know, president of the company, you know, he was very good at instilling a competitive entrepreneurial spirit. All truth be told, until I got to Choate, I was just kind of floating through life. I didn't even know that construction was the deal. And when my fraternity brother said, hey, why don't you come work for us? I was like, well, I'm dating this girl, probably ought to get a job. I'll figure out what I want to do. And I tell people, I laugh. I was like, I still haven't figured out what it is I want to do.
I love it.
So the other interesting thing is after about 3 years, we had the guy that ran my division left. And I was getting ready to go to another division. And Miller came to me and said, hey, would you mind can you stay in the interiors group? That's what I was in, the tenant construction group. And till we find somebody that can run it. And I laugh, I got lucky, right place, right time. They just never found anybody else to run it. So that was pretty much my entire career. I was a division manager running the interior construction group, mostly on the pre-con side and, you know, the relationship side. But back in...
Yeah, one of the principles of the company that you've done, and you did very well. And compliments to you, you retired in your 50s, young 50s to be specific.
Yeah, so, you know, it was funny when after the first true bonus I got went into my hand and then went to pay for my Cherokee membership. And then the next year it got a little bit better. And I was like, holy cow, if I keep working hard, I might be able to retire at 50. And then, you know, the dot bomb, I turned 40 when the dot bomb era came around. And it was a depressing birthday because I was like, I don't think I'm going to get to retire at 50 anymore. But things picked up. So anyways, we created it. We sold the company or created an ESOP, which is a whole different discussion. But back in, I think it was 2017-ish. And I would probably still be there if it wasn't for COVID. And, you know, COVID just made it really difficult to enjoy doing what I was doing professionally. It made it very easy for me to enjoy my non-professional life, which is surrounded by my wife and my 2 boys and getting to do all of these fun things, including sporting clays with. So the Lord blessed us and we decided, you know what, we're just going to sail off into the sunset. We had no plan, like I
Well,
mentioned
you said
before.
no plan, but question, obviously you've been thinking about retirement at age 50. If you can share with our listeners today, what did you envision doing in retirement? Because you clearly had a financial plan to get out. What did you envision the day to day would be like with an early retirement?
Yeah. So funny enough, Duncan, I had no idea. It was, Miller never came to us and said, "Hey, next year you need to do 10 million, and then the next year 50 million, and then the next year 100 million." He always just said, "We want to do as much as we can well." And that philosophy worked because, we that company went to the moon and back. So to answer your question, I really didn't have a plan. It was just a goal. I'm very goal oriented. So I will set goals and work my tail off to figure out how to reach those goals, which, funny enough, in sporting clays, which we'll talk about shortly, there are all kinds of goals you can set for yourself. But when I get to the goal or got to some of these goals, it was kind of like, I don't know what I'm going to do now. I need to set another goal. So I just set goals. So when I retired back so back up a little bit, the farm, we have a farm out in between Mansfield and Monticello, little gentleman's farm where I can sit on the porch and watch pine trees grow with a nice bourbon and a nice cigar. And so when I originally retired, my plan was to spend a lot of time out there. And at the time it was taking a lot of work. So I do all the work out there on my own. And my tractor and I are the two best friends you could ever have. So that was my original goal, was when in 2020, I was like, this is going to give me time to go out and really do what I want to do with the farm and work on it. And we built a house out there, and I just got off the phone with my contractor who well. We're close to finishing another structure out there, but that's what I did. So my plan was I'm going to go be on the farm.
So I'm in admiration of you in a lot of ways. I've known you for such a long time, and I love goal oriented people. Tell me about, and we're talking today about clay shooting sports, and there are lots of different variations of that, from trap to skeet to sporting clays. How did you get involved in shooting clays?
So way, way, way back when, I had a good friend, he's still a good friend, also has retired from Choate, but Bill Bland, who was business development for Choate Construction, and he loved to bird hunt. And so he asked me one day, he was like, you want to join me on a trip? We've got some clients. And I had never bird hunted. I had never, done anything like that. So I was like, absolutely, sounds great. So we took a group of clients and went quail hunting. And then from then on, I was like, oh my gosh, this is heaven. I love doing this. So fast forward, I joined same club you're a member of, Birch. And originally the intent was to have a place to take clients to go bird hunting. Well, in the summertime, you don't bird hunt. And my two sons and Michelle and I spent a lot of time out there in the summertime, and we discovered the clays course out there. So we started shooting clays. And then in 2020, we joined an organization called the NSCA, which is the National Sporting Clays Association. And we signed up for our first registered shoot, and it was February of 2020. It was 32 degrees outside, and we were up at Garland Mountain, which is up in the mountains. Michelle said, this is a lot of, Michelle came with me and the boys came with me. And she said, this is a lot of fun, but I'm not going back out until it gets to about 70 degrees. And then the boys loved it. But then, COVID hit full steam and it put a huge pause, although Sporting Clays was one of the outdoor events that was
Sanctioned.
Considered safe to do. Right. So lots of people kept shooting, but nowhere near as many. But anyways, so that's originally how we got into it.
So question, when we talk about clay, I call it clay target sports. There's lots of different things. There's trap, there's skeet, there's sporting clays. You and I know what those are. For our audience, would you kind of walk us through clay target sport in itself and how that is evolved to what is called sporting clays?
Sure. So sporting clays actually is one of the genres, I guess, or one of the events. You have sporting clays, which I call sporting clays golf for shooters.
Describe what sporting clays is. So
Sure.
the listeners can say, all right, what does that mean? What does that look like?
Yeah, so a typical sporting clays facility, you show up and you jump in a golf cart, and they typically have anywhere from 10, 15 to 20 stations. They call them stations. And you go from station to station, kind of like playing golf, where you go from hole to hole, and you are presented different types of clays or sizes, shapes, colors, all kinds of different things. And it originally started for hunters that were looking for a way to keep their skills sharp during the off season. So the sporting clays course is really kind of set up for bird simulation, I guess. But you go from station to station, they're all different. You keep score and have a lot of fun. There's something cathartic about pulling a little trigger, hearing a boom, and seeing powder fly.
Yes, it's very cathartic. If you have a bad day, go shoot some sporting clays and you will feel much better, I guarantee you.
Right.
So it's interesting. When I started, my father introduced me to trap, and trap is nothing more than a teeny machine. It's the same mechanism, quite frankly, but it's one station, one little trap, and it throws out 1 to 2 of these clay discs that you shoot. And that's the introduction, I guess, to a clay target shooting. Trap shooting can actually get even bigger. I coached my son's team, and trap at Tom Lowe's example. Tom Lowe's a skeet shooting range in Atlanta. They had oscillating traps that would throw targets out a lot further away and a lot faster than the one I had with my dad. And then, of course, there's skeet. Explain what skeet shooting is relative to what else we've talked about.
Sure. So one last point, which will feed into this, is a sporting clays course can take, probably up to 40 acres, maybe more, maybe just a little bit less, but it takes a significant amount of land and a significant investment in the trap machines, which throw the clays, and skeet and traps. And I'll say trap when I'm talking about machines. They're kind of interchangeable. Trap that you're referencing is an actual game. The machines are trap machines or clay machines. But anyway, so there are two, and you might fact check this, but historically, I kind of feel like, or I sense that trap and skeet were really the origination of the game. They're also the only Olympic disciplines that you can shoot with a shotgun. It's funny, we mentioned goals. One of my goals a couple of years ago was to shoot in the 2028 Olympics in Los Angeles. Just, I'm like, fun goal. And my coach at the time said, well, that's a great goal. Problem is you don't shoot sporting clays at the Olympics. You shoot skeet and trap. But anyways, and I'm sure you're going to edit the heck out of this because you'll find that I ramble. But so skeet is a fun game. I tell you what, for a beginner, skeet is a phenomenal game because when you really get into this sport, there are 3 elements of shooting that you really want to hone your skills on. And that is your break point, where you actually shoot the clay, your hold point, where you bring the gun to start the process, and then lastly, your look point. So they're all 3 different locations in a field, and skeet is one of the best games to teach good look, hold, and break points, because once you figure those out,
the patterns are all the same between the 2
patterns
towers.
all the same.
Patterns never change.
Correct. Yeah, and actually, my coach laughs. He'll take us out to a skeet field when he can see that our fundamentals with these 3 things are starting to degrade. And he laughs. He's like, skeet's the easiest game on the planet. Once you learn, to your point, the break point, hold point, and look point for each of the different locations on a skeet field. And then trap, I'm not as... I've shot a little bit of trap, but I honestly have not shot that much trap. The one time that I did shoot it, ton of fun. Seems to be a very fast-paced game. You do have an oscillating clay, and then I think you have an oscillating center trap machine, and then you have a right and a left, which are always shooting, I think, at the same presentation.
That's right.
But similarly, I think it's a great way for beginners to learn those fundamentals.
Let me ask you a question for our listeners who would love to get into this. It can be an intimidating sport because if you're not used to guns and you're not used to other things, it can be intimidating. Tell me about your first gun, your first shotgun. What's a good choice for a first timer, and where would you go to get that?
So I did it the wrong way, and we'll discuss the right and the wrong way. So I really just kind of, like I said, fell into shooting clays. My original clays gun was a Beretta Silver Pigeon 1. At the time
Over and
I
under.
bought mine was an over under, which that was more of I saw these fancy guys out there at the different places shooting over unders, and I was like, I'm getting an over under. So 28-inch barrel, which is pretty short, which is fine for bird hunting, but for clays hunting, it's a little short. And mine was a field gun. Some little nuances between a clays gun and a field gun, but it worked fine. You can shoot clays with semi-automatics are great starting guns. Both my boys started out with a Beretta A semi-automatic. You don't see many of the pros shooting semi-automatics, mostly I think because there's a lot of mechanics in a semi-automatic, which opens you up to gun malfunctions and other things that the simplicity of an over-under with a trigger and 2 firing pins just you avoid. But so I started out with a Beretta Silver Pigeon 1, 28-inch barrel, 12 gauge.
And a field gun versus, I guess you'd call a field gun is you're using in the field, you shoot birds. It's a lighter gun versus, is it a coarse gun or losing the language?
Clay's gun. Like if you go on Beretta's website and you look for guns, you've got field guns and sporting guns. They call it their sporting guns.
And the sporting are heavier because it reduces the recoil to make you a better shot on the course. I think that's the main difference.
Yes. Yeah, and so the evolution of my shot that Silver Pigeon. Another, I think, notable difference is a field gun might get shot 50 times a year. So and to your point on the weight, the mechanics of that gun, the action are not as robust, I guess you would say, because my probably shoot anywhere from 8 to 10,000 clays a year, and a field gun is probably not going to hold up under that year after year after year, as opposed to I moved from the Silver Pigeon to my first true clays gun, which was a 692 Beretta. Yeah, it's funny. So gun manufacturers, I think to most are like golf ball manufacturers.
Yes.
Everybody's got a golf ball. If I don't hit, a Titleist Pro V1, it'll be a horrible day. So in my head, if I don't shoot a Beretta, I'll miss the clay. So I'm a Beretta guy.
For our audience, I think that's a great metaphor. For our audience here, whether you get a field gun or a clay target gun, you're going to be just fine. I think anywhere you would go, from a Cabela's Bass Pro Shop, you can find a gun store in town and go to the professional there and ask them to help size you up for what you want to do. And they can kind of give you an idea of what you should have, quite frankly. And Steve, a budget you can get from one end to the other of your beginning gun, and maybe 12 gauge is a great way to start. $1,500 all the way up to 100,000.
Sure. Yeah.
So, and I say the 100,000, when I think of the upper end, I'm thinking of a Holland and Holland.
Yeah.
But for a starter, you can actually get an even cheaper semi-automatic gun, for $600. I don't think I'd recommend that, but somewhere I think I'd budget somewhere between $1,500 and $3,500 for a good gun that you go out. If you continue with this, you won't be embarrassed when you go out. People go, really? You're using a tricycle when you're going on a marathon with a bike? Bad metaphor, but just using that as a start.
I've been beat by a Stoger. So
that's a $600 gun. I don't know how.
$600 gun. I had
exactly.
a good friend that had kind of gotten into clays at the same time, and I went and bought my fancy Silver Pigeon, which really isn't all that fancy. And he was like, let's go shoot. And end of the day, he outshot me with a $600 Stoger.
Just like in golf, you can have your Pro V1, or you can have and you can use a top flight, and you're going to be just fine.
Yeah. So I'm now shooting, which is a little more ego than it is necessity, because my 692 was a fine gun. I just bought my second DT11, and I bought my first DT11 just because I'm trying to. It's like buying your first set of Titleist, irons or whatever. No, when you start golf, you're not spending that kind of money for, just like shooting. You're not going to spend that kind of money when you get started, to your point. The gun that I just bought, which was a reward for punching up in a class, which we'll talk about later. And it's just a fancier version of the sporting DT11. I spent way too much money. One last point, and then you can give me the hook. So as I said, when I started this, I kind of started it what I would now consider the wrong way. Is I tried to feel my way through guns and learning how to shoot, and just by going and buying a gun and throwing it up to my shoulder and trying to shoot clays and blah, blah, blah. If you are truly serious about getting into clays, or even if you just want to experiment with it, my suggestion would be to find a coach. I call them coach, or a instructor, and that instructor typically is going to be at a club where you've got loaner guns, and you can go shoot a semi-automatic, or you can go shoot a 20 gauge or a 12 gauge, and it will be much more fun, because your first shot will be a well-shouldered, well-fitted experience, as opposed to picking up a gun that doesn't fit you, that blows your shoulder out. And people worry about 12 gauge. If you shoulder a 12 gauge properly and the gun is sized for you, other than some other nuances in speed and other things, there is no more recoil with a 12 gauge than there is with, let's say, a 20 gauge.
And for the audience here, Steve is an elite shooter. So some of the things we're talking about here is like having an elementary school education, then going to a Harvard Business School. As Steve is talking about a lot of things that may apply or may not apply to the audience, but he's absolutely right. Getting a professional to help you get fitted can make a difference as you go down the road and you're wondering why you're not getting any better. And somebody can easily come in and say, you're really not shooting a gun that's fitted for what you want to do, right?
Yeah. Just like having a golf instructor. And the other key too is, for me, it took me a while. I've had lessons with several different people, and I have a coach now that I've been working with for the last couple of years that has really been helpful in getting me to the point that I'm at right now. And just like golf or any other sport, you hit plateaus and you fight through it and you start climbing back up. And there are also times maybe that your current coach is awesome and fully capable of getting you to a point, but then you might have to go to somebody else to start working on that next step. So, but get a coach. If there's anything that I could say in this game, is find an instructor. Start out correctly. It'll save you a lot of money, and it will make it much more enjoyable.
So the gun is the starting point. We also need to have safety as it relates to shooting. Tell us about the supplement to the gun, particularly what does it mean to have good eyes and ears?
Sure. And to your point earlier, we could go off on down 10 different rabbit holes on all that, but fundamentally you need glasses, and you need to put them on before you go out onto the course. I've been on courses, sitting in a stand, shooting a clay going that way, and then had a pellet hit me from, halfway across the course, that the magic pellet that came down and hit you. So eyes are key. I mean, you can't play the game without your eyes. Ears, you just made fun of me for pulling out my hearing aids. The ears are not quite necessary for the game, but for life in general. I should have done a better job probably over the years, and I didn't. But a good set of foamy earplugs, or if you can. I don't like shooting with ear muffs because of the way I shoulder the gun. It just lots of times gets in the way. But then you can take both of those to a different level. There's all kinds of lenses and colors and blah, blah, blah. And honestly, I shoot with shooting glasses made by a company called Ranger, and they do have a coating on them. I went to an eye doctor who is very well known in the shooting sports, Dr. Richard Colo, and he did manipulate the prescription on my lenses, but I shoot clear lenses. His philosophy is shoot as clear as you can, because the better you see the clay, the better you can hit it. Funny enough, my earplugs, my ear are custom. They used to be electronic, but they're the second pair of electronics that have failed on me. So I pulled the electronics out. I took a glue gun, filled the hole, and I used the molded. They're just dumb, They're as good as a dollar packet of earplugs that I spent $1,500 on.
I think
Don't.
Steve is making a great example here, and I think golf is a good metaphor. You can have some very expensive golf clubs, very expensive balls, designer wear outfits, designer wear glasses to make you a better golfer. But at the end of the day, if you're getting started, all you need is basic protection, a basic gun, and you can kind of evolve from there and spend as much money as you want to spend.
Yeah.
This goes to, what's the cost of a typical round, Steve? You're going out for a sporting clay round. You're typically shooting 100 rounds. You're going to 12 to 15 stations. What does it cost? You've got ammunition costs. You've got the clay costs. Tell us, what are you spending for a round of clays?
Yeah, there are variables there, but for the most part, I would say that, it's all about the same. Depends on your club. Are you a member, not a member? You get member clays prices versus non-member, blah, blah, blah. But I always tell people, for 100 clays, it's about $100. It's, about 50 cents every time you push the button and a clay flies. And then, depending on your ammunition, what days, or an average cost for a box of ammunition is, 8 to, it's pretty broad, maybe $10 to $15 for a box. So you're going to shoot 25. Yeah, you're going to shoot 4 boxes, and then you're going to shoot 50 clays.
It's once again, it's the metaphors like golf. If you went to a round of golf at a public course today, you're probably going to spend $100, or if you're at Pebble Beach, you're going to spend several $100s to go play a round of golf. So it's very much in a lot of ways analogous to golf.
Yeah, right. Yes. You're exactly right.
Question, Steve Soteres has become a very accomplished shooter. I mean, he really has. Tell me about the competitive leagues you shoot in. In particular, there's an organization, FITASC. I might not be saying it right, FITACS. Tell us about the leagues you're shooting in, what that looks like, and, as I say, the different ways you're shooting.
Sure. So, yeah, FITASC is actually a game, but that is an acronym that you could offer me $1 million and I couldn't tell you what it stands for. And I'm a FITASC referee. That is a little bit of a difference. When you go to a sporting clays competition, you might have a trapper, which could be some kid. They went to the high school and said, hey, we'll pay you each $100 for the weekend if you come push this button when somebody says pull. A FITASC referee is actually, you have to take a class and test and get certified and blah, blah, blah. But FITASC, fun game. I love FITASC. I probably have more trophies in FITASC than I do in sporting. But FITASC is a low gun game, similar simulation.
Meaning, think the audience doesn't know what you mean by that. It means you have to.
So it is not a pre-mounted game. You cannot have the gun. They actually have a line that they'll put on your vest, and the butt of the gun or the end of the gun has to start below that line until you see the clay. Not when you say pull, not when you hear the machine go. And they'll actually hide the machine sometimes, but you have to actually have visual contact with the bird, and then you can shoulder the gun and shoot.
If you shoulder it too fast, do they disqualify the round?
Well, so that's another beautiful thing about FITASC and it having referees is you get to know these guys and girls over time, and it's a lot of fun, and they're fun, and they get it. 90% of the people out there shooting are like us. They're amateurs, and they're just really out there to have fun. So to answer the question is, most times they'll give you a warning. If you do it again, they'll maybe give you a little sterner warning. If you keep doing it, they'll probably, I've never seen anybody get disqualified, but they'll fuss at you a good bit. But so the original question, types of...
Well, they're different games, I guess. FITASC is one of the games within sporting clays. You're shooting in so many different tournaments. Yeah, and the different organizations you're...
Yeah, so the governing body... So here's the deal. You can go shoot tournaments and not be a member of anything. You just don't get points. And I referenced points and setting goals and moving up. But so the National Sporting Clays Association is an organization based out of Austin, Texas. It's actually where they have the nationals, and there's different levels of tournaments. You start with, as an NSCA member, I call them show up and shoots, but every weekend local clubs just have fun shoots, but they're registered. So you go shoot, you turn in your scorecard, you get points, blah, blah, blah. And then the next level, well, below that maybe is, charity events where you don't get points, you don't get anything for the fun shoots. Then you have state level shoots, regional level shoots, national level shoots, and then world. I mean, there are world FITASC, world, you can go to all over the globe and shoot in these tournaments. You know what? The really fun thing about that is, as much as I love playing golf, other than if you throw in a bunch of money and you get in a member or a pro-am or something, there is not a golf tournament out there where you can show up and be on the tee box with Tiger Woods. But I can show up at a NSCA registered shoot and have Will Hinton in my squad, and Will Hinton is a guy who's been to the Olympics and won gold. So I'm literally shooting with a guy that has won Olympic gold medals.
So you're at an elite level the way you're shooting with Will Hinton. Tell me, for those who are trying to understand, what does that mean? Are they shooting 1,000 out of 1,000 in a tournament weekend and you're shooting? What does that mean? How well are they shooting?
Sure. And God bless you, Duncan, for referring to me with such accolades. I feel like I am a really good shot. I'm working on being a great shot. I am nowhere near 2028 Olympic status yet. So that's the thing. So NSCA, you join at the NSCA. Side note, when you join, your first year is free. And typically you can go to just to show up. You can go to any tournament and say, I'm not a member. And they'll say, well, we are glad to have you. Fill out this paperwork. And then after that, it's $50 a year. But the reason to join the NSCA is because they do a ranking system. And so this gets to your point of levels of people shooting. So when I started back in 2020, they had an E class level, their classes. It used to go from E all the way to master class. And they have recently added a pro squad or a pro class of shooting for really just the bigger shoots, national, regionals. So when you join the NSCA, whether you're a beginner and have never picked up a gun or have actually shot your entire life, but you've never been a registered shooter, you get thrown into what used to be E class. They got rid of E. It's now D class. Full disclosure, frustrating class, because the only way to get out of that class is to go to tournaments and win in your class. So I only shoot for points. I only shoot against the people in my class. But in the lower classes, you can get really good shots and you can get people that aren't very good shots, but are getting better, but you get passed over because you're getting beat by these guys. And then they move out of the class, move up. It goes now D. Let's see if I can do the alphabet in reverse. You got D class, which is kind of the beginner. You have C class. You have B class. You have A class, which is what I am. You have double A, and then you have master class.
Where's the pro in there? You said there was a pro thrown in.
Well, so what was occurring is people were making it up to master class. And then, like I said, so if I was in master class, then I would be shooting against Will Hinton, because he's a masterclass shooter. And so for me to beat Will Hinton would be the most amazing day of my life. I don't think it'll ever happen. But so what they did is in these big tournaments, they said, okay, it's really not fair for Steve Soteres or him, Harry Harp. He's a masterclass shooter, but he's good. But even for him to shoot and win at masterclass level against a Will Hinton would be very difficult. So what was happening is the masterclass shooters were like, well, I made it a masterclass. I'm not going to re-up next year. I'm done. I met my goal. And so people were quitting or not joining NSCA. So they created this pro class. So
what's the percentage? Give me an idea what percentage is from the best.
Yeah. So most of your bigger shoots, the main, are usually 2 days, 200 birds. You shoot 100 birds the first day, and then you shoot another 100 birds the second day.
And bird is a clay target for our listeners.
A clay target. That's and, right. The Will Hintons are shooting the Anthony Matarices, oh gosh, I'm freezing up. But all these really good shots, they're shooting, 198 out of 200 birds. I mean,
Wow.
they're doing,
And there's a shoot off at the end because there's probably a handful of guys that are like that
if
in
they're
every
tied,
tournament. And
right, they'll do shoot offs.
that's
In my
amazing.
class, we're shooting anywhere from 160 to the really, if you have a really good day, you might get up into the 180s. So it's still pretty good, but you can shoot, 110 out of 200 clays in D class and win your class. And they call them punches, which you get points. You can also win a little bit of money. It's funny. I got a $550 check the other day from a tournament because I won my class.
How
And
much did
Michelle
it
was like,
cost?
"Oh my
How
gosh."
how much did it cost to be a part of
Well,
that?
that's the point. So Michelle's like, "Oh my gosh, that's awesome." I was like, "Yeah, but it cost me 800 to shoot in the thing." So the money's not the point for most of us, but
As a point of nomenclature, I should have done this earlier. We've made reference to a couple of terms that I think the audience should know. One is bird, one is pull. In the origins of clay target, they started with a trap machine. In the way that you would cock the arm back to throw these little disc frisbees, and the way you did that is you pulled a rope that would release the trigger that would throw these discs out into the field that you could shoot. And so when you hear people today beginning a shot, they'll say pull, which means to release what is really a push button system now. The second thing is we say birds, what we're meaning are the clay targets, which leads me to one of my final questions. One thinks that if you're doing clay target shooting, that you're naturally a hunter, and there's a degree of intimidation there because not everybody's a hunter that wants to shoot clays. Tell me about your thoughts as you've witnessed there are a lot of people who are not hunters that love clay targets and vice versa. One doesn't lead to the other, does it?
yeah, no, not at all. It's funny to your point on the terminology. So, and as you get more and more into this, and I am voracious about this sport. I'm actually a level 1 instructor, and I really did it not to make money, but to help people more educated, but to also make myself better. But the pull, interestingly enough, I don't know the dates and years, but the birds and the pulls. So what they used to do is they used to actually have little boxes, and they would actually put a bird in that box. And when the shooter called pull, there was a string attached to that box, and you would pull that string, it would pop the door open, and a bird would fly out.
Great origin. That predates my story that I had as a boy growing up.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's the original.
So to the question is it truly was a game that was started to help hunters just stay frosty. But so when you get this coach again, which I really recommend, you'll talk about different ways to shoot. And there is a term, instinctive shooter, which if you think about the way you bird hunt is let's just use quail as an example. So you're walking through a field and the dogs get on point, but you're not walking through the field with the gun on your face like this. You're walking with the gun down in a relatively comfortable way of holding the gun. And then the dogs will get on point and you'll flush the covey, birds fly, and you raise the gun, you shoulder the gun and fire. I grew up I grew up. I started my shooting career hunting, and that was how we hunted. I still, when I shoot, well, FITASC is more low gun, more of this instinctive shooting. I'm rambling a little bit just because I have a lot of thoughts in my head. But when you start shooting, one error that people make is they think, oh, I got to have this gun smashed up into my face. The issue with that is once you put a gun in your face, and you get over the recoil situation, and at some point I don't even feel the gun go off anymore. I've shot so much, and anyone will get to that point. But once you put that gun in your face, all of a sudden you've got this big piece of metal in your field of view when really you should be looking at the clay. So a more instinctive type of shooting is probably a little better off, or I call it it's called a cheat mount. My coach calls it. So I'll shoulder the gun, but I'll drop it down, call pull, and then put the gun up. But here's an interesting thing, and this game has evolved exponentially over even, I think, the last 10 years. You talk types of clays. You've got a standard clay. You've got a mini clay. You've got rabbits. You've got raboos, which is a rabbit you throw in the air. You've got quartering birds, crossing birds, shondels, teals, trap birds. I mean, and then you can mix all that up with different size clays. And then on top of that, you can make that clay can be orange with a black bottom, or black with a black bottom, or all orange or green or pink, or I've seen, all kinds of different colors, which is important because you throw a green clay in a wooded area, kind of like behind me, and you've got green leaves and green clays, it makes it tough to see. But the
So
sport has
for the audience here, Steve is such a great shot. Do not be intimidated by what he's telling you. The majority of
yes,
the times you shoot at most courses, unless you get to this elite, not the A level that Steve's at, don't let him intimidate you with all
yeah,
this. This is really for a different level of shooter. Steve, let me ask you a question which I think is appropriate for our retired friends here, or not even retired. What I love about this sport, and I used to coach my son's team, is it's coeducational. You can throw a football with your boys growing up. Mom's usually not going to be out there playing football with the family. This is a great coeducational sport you can enjoy with your spouse or other people of the opposite sex well into your retired years. Do you and Michelle shoot? Is this something that you've experienced as a family event?
absolutely. The sport has exploded in the youth shooting. And what it's done is it's given kids that may not, to your point, like to play football or baseball, or, they're not, into basketball or whatever. And they've never hunted. And some of these kids are master class shooters, but have never hunted a bird a day in their life. You ask about Michelle. Yes, Michelle and my two boys joined NSCA together. Michelle still shoots with me. We just got back from a week of shooting with a bunch of good friends up at the homestead. And when we go to these tournaments, which honestly, like I said, we're good shooters. We are not in this to make money. My goal is to become a master class shooter, and I feel like I'll make it there. But we go to tournaments, and you're on our text chain, and we'll get 4 or 5 guys. The Seminole Cup is a great example. So last year there were 4 of us that went to the Seminole Cup to shoot in a number of the different games that you can play. But we took our wives, we stayed at Sea Island. We probably would have shot better if we hadn't had as much bourbon and smoked as many cigars as we did. None of us do it to make.
Michelle smokes cigars? Don't go there.
No, I don't even think she would know which end to light.
Hey, question.
Don't tell her that.
No, we're going to do a lot of editing here. We spent so much time with you today, and we're blessed to have you a part of this. A good friend of mine in Las Vegas, a part of my inner circle, posted an idea that I should have at every podcast going forward to ask a question of our guests that frames the perspective of what we're trying to do at the Retirement Spy. And so I'm going to ask the question, and then we'll kind of comment on it afterwards while we're doing this, but I think it's a good question. Steve Soteres, when do you think you're going to die? Or better said, what age do you think you will no longer be retired and playing on this earth?
Yeah, that's a great question. I do encourage you to ask it to everybody. So it's interesting to me, and before we hit record, we were talking a little bit about, it's funny, anybody that retires probably looks at their number, whatever that is, their accounts, and adds stuff up and says, okay, well, this is my lifestyle. I like to do X, Y, and Z, and that costs this amount of money. So and I did it. I said, okay, I've got this much money and I like to do this every year. So I divided that by the amount of money I had, and it spit out an age. And fortunately, I know I won't, or no, fortunately, I don't think I'll make it to the age that the number came out to. But here's the deal, and I would highly encourage that whether you have a plan. You asked me if I had a plan when I retired, and I really didn't, because it kind of happened during COVID, and if COVID hadn't happened, I'd probably still be working. But you need to do something. You need to be passionate about something, and you need to do something that gives you purpose. So maybe this is a good way to answer this question. So a week in the life of Steve Soteres. I get up on Monday morning and I do interviews. I'm kidding. This is my first interview ever. But I get up on Monday morning and I do things around the house in Atlanta that don't get done because I'm not here very often. Tuesday morning, and this is key, and I think this is what's going to save or extend my life, is I spend the day down at the Shepherd Center volunteering. It's an amazing place, and I get way more out of it than they get from me, I'm sure. But do something that enriches or, just gives you, it gives me purpose. I look forward to going down to Shepherd Center every Tuesday. Have fun. So Wednesday mornings, I get up and I've got a group of guys, 4 of us, that play golf every Wednesday morning, and then have a job, but it doesn't have to be one that pays. So I mentioned I have a farm out near Monticello, and I do everything out there. I do it, and I mow. So after golf on Wednesdays, I get in the truck and I head to the farm, and I spend the day mowing, and sometime depending on the season, planting a little bit. We have a garden out there. Right now, I am construction managing a barn dominium, but it gives me purpose. I mean, I love doing this stuff. And then every Thursday morning, I get up and we have a group of guys that shoot sporting clays. Once a month, we have a little league that we shoot FITASC. Fridays, we usually go somewhere other than our normal club and shoot a little more difficult presentations in clays if we're getting ready for a tournament. And then my wife, Michelle, actually is still working for a little nonprofit, but she comes out Friday afternoons, and because we're so busy during the week, we start our weekends, which usually involves shooting at least one round and a lot of sitting on the porch and smoking cigars. So to answer your question, I don't know when I'm going to die. I just hope it's as long as I can keep pulling a trigger, then I'm a happy man. When I can't pull a trigger anymore.
Which is a wonderful segue to say another reason for the clay targets is you can do that well into old age, even more so than golf sometimes, I think, because my golf back will be thrown out long before I'm dead, I think. But I think I can still shoot clays forever, until the time comes. Steve Soteres, we are so blessed to have you on this podcast. Thank you so much. For our audience, thank you for being a part of this today. Always remember, please like our YouTube channel at the bottom, and please subscribe on all the other major podcast networks. Steve, we look forward to catching up with you again for the 28 Olympics.
Yeah, that might be a while.